And we're live. Hey people, welcome to the newly named STA Clinician Podcast, formerly known for the last 5 years as the Sports Therapy Association Podcast. My name is Matt Phillips, creator of OneChatLive.com, and as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and Facebook page on a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. So you join us for part 4 of our Neurodivergence in Healthcare series in January 2026, with the goal of providing valuable information to help soft tissue therapists work closer and more effectively with neurodivergent patients and clients. Tonight, in this episode, entitled The Neurodivergent Therapist, we're going to be discussing steps that neurodivergent therapists can take to help look after one's own health and energy capacity, including how to structure one's day, build in recovery time, use energy accounting, and lots more. I'm going to be joined by a couple of people who I'm really looking forward to. Sarah Meharg, occupational therapist and neurodivergent accessibility and inclusion consultant at Moodlifter and Neuroflectuk UK. And also Kassandra Clemens is returning from part 1 of the series. Kassandra is founder of Heal Your Confidence and a level 7 specific learning differences specialist who helps in particular late identified neurodivergent professionals. We were going to have the wonderful Benjamin Mace Crosley of Repose Injury Rehab with us also this evening as advertised, but unfortunately Ben's unable to make it. So do check out part 1, for example, on communication with Benjamin. He's a fantastic clinician, third year BSc sports rehabilitator, and all-round lovely chap. So sorry you can't be with us, Ben, but we are thinking of you. Hopefully not too much because we need to get on with the show, but you're here with us in our minds. Right, I must give a huge thank as well to my 2 guests last week in part 3, which was episode 270, entitled Barriers. I was joined by James Dewar-Haggart, founder of Strong Path, Neuro-Inclusive and Mental Health Informed Sports Coaching, website strongpath.org.uk, and also Leslie Campbell, a massage therapist and tutor based in Glasgow, Scotland, website lesliecampbellmassage.co.uk. It's a hugely informative episode. I always say that. I must sound like a record broken, but it's a wonderful episode, available as always on all podcast apps and YouTube if you want to watch the video. Looking at barriers that neurodivergent patients and clients so often find themselves up against when seeking healthcare, which typically reduce their access to effective or suitable care. So that's episode 270. Check it out if you haven't already. And also, finally, before I bring my very patient guests up, just a reminder that if you do identify as a neurodivergent therapist, whether through formal diagnosis or not, you're very welcome and encouraged to join our new private Facebook group, Neurodivergent MSK Clinicians, which is a safe, non-judgmental space to share, support, chat, or simply listen. Search it up on Facebook and you will find us. There'll be a link in the show notes as well. Please remember, when you request to join this group, there are some questions which you'll need to fill out when you join. Right then, back to tonight, episode 271 of the STA Clinician Podcast, The Neurodivergent Therapist, with special guests Sarah Meharg and Kassandra Clemens. Good evening, Sarah Meharg and Kassandra Clemens. How are you?
Good evening.
Evening. Also really excited because you did a world exclusive that Neuroflectuk hasn't been mentioned on air. It is brand new, so you're the first person to introduce me with the Neuroflectuk part of my title. So I'm like,
no. Oh my God, I'm sorry if that wasn't meant to be leaked out then.
No,
this is what happens on the show. Things are leaked. It's
world exclusive.
It's okay, is it? Oh, exclusive.
The website went live yesterday.
Thank you for that. I'm so excited. Wow. Great. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Really, really appreciate it. Kassandra, you were with us with part 1. Sarah, you haven't been on the show yet, so really excited. Thank you very much. I should also, before I forget, because I do forget, now my concentration is solely on you two, I forget about the wonderful people who have joined us here live tonight. So just a little shout out to people who have already come through the door. If you have joined us and you're not used to joining us, then I can bring your comments up on the screen. For example, Nikki Mansfield, hey Nikki, how you doing? Has said oi oi in typical Mansfield style. Good to see you. Cecily Hislop, welcome, says evening lovelies, still at my jigsaw. Haven't moved all week. Fantastic, Cecily. I'm sure that's exactly what you needed. Glenn Murphy is here saying good evening all. Very nice. Thanks for joining us, Glenn, as always. Danny Hall, loads of people coming in. This is going to be a popular episode, I'm sure. Sarah Jones as well. Great to see you, Sarah, of the ST School. Multitasking, cooking, tea, and listening. Of course you are, Sarah. I'm not surprised at all. I'm not going to generalise or make any comment there. J Biker Freak. Okay, I'm not sure who that would be, but we love your name already. Thanks for joining us. If you want to put your name in here so I know who you are in case I'm talking to somebody I do know, then feel free to do that. Or not, stay under your Biker Freak pseudonym if that's what you prefer. Right, I'm going to turn to my guest. Thanks so much for joining us, people, live. It really makes, I only do it because it's live. We do upload it as a podcast, but I love having it live. It makes it much more impulsive, and who knows what's going to happen. So let me turn my attention back to Sarah and Kassandra. For listeners who are not aware of the work you do, maybe we could take a moment just to maybe Sarah, first of all, say who you are, where you are, what you do relevant to this episode.
So I'm an occupational therapist. We work in a range of settings, so people tend to kind of think about us in terms of working on wards, helping people be discharged, but our work is about helping recognize the strengths, barriers people face in doing the activity that's meaningful and important to them. So I've been doing that for 25 years. I've worked in every setting you could possibly imagine. But since 2019, I've been self-employed at Moodlifter, and that's undergone various iterations, but predominantly focused on working one-to-one and providing education around how to work with our neurodivergent brains, how to kind of build a life that is working for us rather than the one we think we're meant to have. And then secondly, I've just, with one of your previous guests, Rosie, launched Neuroflectuk, which is focused much more on training and CPD and reflective questions as professionals we can ask ourselves to improve accessibility.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So relevant to tonight. And you're based like Rosie in Solihull, correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay, good to know where you are in the world. Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. Kassandra, back from part one, but for people who didn't catch you on part one, could you give us a little resume of who you are and where you are?
Of course I can. Really good to hear about what Sarah is doing. I'm very excited about that as well. I'm not a therapist as such, but I've been working with neurodivergent students to start with for many years, and now I'm self-employed. I've created the business Heal Your Confidence. We are a community interest company, and I've done that because during the time I was at the university, not knowing then how very complex neurodivergent I was myself, I realized two things. One was, when people felt really listened to, magic happened very quickly and very strongly. And I've learned from people all the time. And the other thing that consistently was very clear to me is that most people have a really, really hard time to find out what's actually going on with them. And in terms of the neurodivergence itself, so there isn't really, mostly there is no holistic framework to it. We are not usually autistic or ADHD. We have different brains. We think differently, and individually that is, we could be all kinds of things, but we've never learned how to use our brains. So there is a huge impact of accumulated trauma, and that's very often the problem with the dysregulation and so on. And as long as you don't know that, you don't know what you're working with. And people are a bit stuck. And even finding out what's going on in the most basic sense is still very difficult for a lot of people, because there are very long waiting lists. Not everybody gets to understand how to go about it. It's very expensive if you want to do it by yourself. The NHS is not always very quick to give you support and help. So that's why I created the business, because I really wanted to serve people in a much better way, and so, as you know, we do a lot of things. We do monthly events, we do the lunchtime event. I love talking to people, because in all this time I found out that these things apply to myself. I just thought I was a freak, and I've learned a lot about myself. I can do things now that I never thought I could be doing. So while I'm not a therapist, I see people on a very regular basis, and I hear lots of stories, and lots of individual stories, lots of stories as a group. Yeah, so that's me.
That's wonderful. Fantastic. I'm just thinking here, you've got Moodlifter, which in itself is just a great name, and then Heal Your Confidence. I mean, what powerful, lovely names. Really cool. I don't know how long you thought about what you were going to call your businesses, but yeah, you did well. I like that. A reminder to live viewers, we'd love you to ask questions. Okay, there's comments already coming in. Just a reminder, because of the nature of what we're doing tonight, talking about, this does go into public domain. So if you're asking a question which you think might be personal, you don't want somebody else to see it, you know how small the world is. El mundo es un pañuelo, they say in Spanish. The world is a handkerchief. Doesn't sound so good in English, but just bear that in mind, because it might be something you're sharing, which we're going to create a wonderfully safe place for you now. I mean, these two guests in particular are going to make you feel so relaxed and free to say anything. But if you do want to say something which you think you'd prefer to be anonymous, then if you look at the corner of the screen, you'll see a Slido QR tag. So you're welcome to scan that, and that'll take you to Slido. And what you can do there is type in a question or a comment, and nobody will know who you are, which might be more fitting if you have a little think before sharing it. So your boss or your colleagues, or you know what it's like. I'm sure already I'm teaching you how to suck eggs. But bear that in mind. But we would love to hear from you and share experiences. Just remember, it could go public. So think before you type. Think before you type. Right. So thank you for that, Kassandra. Thank you for the introduction.
Hannah is asking an important question.
Oh, in that case, thank you.
How do you deal with the fear of asking to be assessed and then not being diagnosed? That they'll actually say you're just a bit rubbish and humaning. Well, actually, Hannah, you're not the only one. I've met many, many people with that problem, because the whole assessment framework is very flawed. And I see people in all kinds of ways being stopped or being misdiagnosed, actually. That's what we are here for. We can talk to you. So ask Matt, he tells you how you can talk to us, and just go ahead and talk to us. Yeah, don't keep it to yourself. You will be listened to by people who know, who are neurodivergent themselves, and surely you are not rubbish and you are not saying things that are not true. It's just the framework that's letting you down there.
Can I also add to that? Because I worked as a diagnostic assessor for 4 or 5 years. I met very few people that didn't start the process without that fear of, what if I'm a fraud? What if? And that fear can hold us back from exploring it. And it's a really big, vulnerable thing to put yourself forwards to be diagnosed. What I would say from an assessor's perspective is, we know how many barriers there are to getting in front of us. You have to have gone to your GP, you have to have filled in forms, you have to have rehashed your whole history and unpicked things. Most people don't come to us lightly. So we know that there is something going on. And whilst I can't speak for every service, what I would say is a good assessment, hopefully, is about sense making, and in a way might be therapeutic. And there is a risk that someone might say, you may not meet the diagnostic criteria, but hopefully that doesn't leave you feeling lost. It can happen. It doesn't always happen. It isn't usually a sense of you're a bit rubbish and humaning. It will be, according to diagnostic criteria, there are other explanations for this, and we sometimes minimize those other explanations. We go, oh, they've said it's just trauma, or just this. There is no such thing as just trauma. Trauma is so powerful, so encompassing. Having said that, I will also acknowledge that not everyone has a positive experience of assessment. So getting support around you to self-advocate if you don't feel heard, if you have felt misunderstood, is also really important.
Yeah, Sarah, that's really so true.
Yeah, Hannah, don't give up. I think that's, that was one of the things which, thanks to Hannah for that question. I think apart from all the other things probably we're going to mention tonight, like, looking after your day and getting it structured and what you can do in clinic and kind of really, the main thing, which we've already kind of touched on, I guess, is just realize how much support you can have around you and put it in place and have it there, because a lot of people will go alone, and it might not be the people who traditionally you would suspect of being support for you, like family. It can often be, for a lot of people, not the first people you want to go to with these things, especially when you're filling out forms and stuff like that. So, but there are people out there who you can confide in, and you don't have to straight away, you can get to know them. That's why we set up the Facebook group for neurodivergent MSK clinicians. And yeah, there's people out there, and you're probably going to need them at some point. So I think that's really important to guide you and help you throughout the process, because it doesn't all go smoothly, doesn't it? It's not a perfect, guess what, NHS isn't perfect, especially although there are free ways of doing it, and there's information for people who are worried about not having the money to do it. Then there is right to choose and things like that, but it's not a perfect system. It never is. So yeah, cool. Anything else on the subject of support? Anything which people might not know about, which you think they could look into or consider?
Autism Central has just launched, which is an NHS England, so it is England specific. That is geared at peer support for families, but so people often rule themselves out from that. But if we think of the genetic links of autism, most of the people in there are going to be autistic. So if you're suddenly discovering, oh, maybe I'm neurodivergent because I've seen it in my children or my siblings, that is run by a team who I've worked with, quite a lot of them, on the National Autism Training Programme. The whole team is pretty much neurodivergent. They have a really good understanding from a lived experience as well as an academic and a professional experience. So they're putting on lots of free events at the moment because it's fully funded. There's also the Facebook group. Locally, there's quite often directories to be aware of in your area that may be worth tuning into. And Kassandra, I do believe you've got some stuff as well, haven't you, to signpost people to?
Yeah, we have got the monthly events. The next one is on Thursday, so you can get all the details for that. And that one is on neurodivergence and navigating relationships. So we have got a different theme every month. But we also have got the lunchtime event people can come to and just talk to someone, someone who just listens because they know what it's like, That's a good starting point. And you might find some really good people, even in your friendship group, who haven't talked about it themselves, just very gently get it out there and get yourself some support. But that's really good to know, Sarah. Are we capturing these kind of information, Matt? Do we write that down somewhere? Do we capture that information?
Yeah. I'll go through it with the tooth comb, and we'll put into links things like Sarah's just pointed out. We'll make sure. Yeah, everything we say will go into the links.
There's another organisation I'll get you the link for, which is for neurodivergent people in general, rather than just autistic people. The name isn't coming to me off the top of my head, but I will give you the link. It does, again, a monthly Zoom call, but they've also got a brilliant directory of neurodivergent therapists if you decide that you do want some private confidential support. And they've got a lot of really good kind of screening to make sure that things are kind of going to be helpful to you. So I'll ping you that as well.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Inspired by Hannah, I mean, this is great. I planned something and it's kind of turned itself in its head, which is brilliant, because that's what we should all be doing as clinicians and therapists, is listening to what the people want and then bending all your own ideas backwards. So I'm interested in this idea of support before we go into ways of putting things in place in clinic. I've heard you, for example, Kassandra, talk quite a lot on the idea of self-compassion. And that can be like a really important thing, because it can be a traumatic experience, all of this. And that's something which, you need to kind of forgive yourself. Could you expand on that a little bit? That might be really useful for some of our listeners.
Well, I don't know about, Hannah and people who had that experience, but generally speaking, I would say most neurodivergent people had to work very, very hard to get where they are, and had to push through so many barriers, and still most of the time they felt like an outsider, so because when we were very small already we didn't really fit in, and so we have to mask that a lot, generally speaking, and it just makes us feel that there's something wrong with us. And that is a very big reason for emotional dysregulation, talking to ourselves as if we were our best enemy instead of our best friend, being very negative about ourselves, while very often we have got the greatest compassion for everybody else around us, but we see ourselves in a very dim light very often. And I have found that usually we need other people who have been through this and have come out the other end to help us really overcome that, because it's a very old pattern, isn't it? I mean, it probably started very, very young. But it's so important, we have to become our own best friends. And why shouldn't we? It's amazing what we tend to be able to do, with a little bit of self-compassion, you also start to think very differently about so many different things. And you also become more critical about people who have been very critical about yourself, but usually in a compassionate way. We realize that people just didn't know better, or were perhaps afraid, about their own weirdness, and therefore, are quite happily critical of other weird people. But it's very difficult to do that on your own. So most people that I have known, one way or another, have found a group that would help them, have friends where they can discuss that, go to events, or even go to therapists, or go to people like me who have got what you would call specialist understanding. Yeah.
Does that resonate with you, Sarah?
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things people can intellectually know about, but actually embodying it and feeling it is so different. Paul Gilbert, who was one of the kind of writers who came up with compassion-focused therapy, he defines compassion as the recognition of suffering, but combined with the actions to alleviate that suffering. And I think sometimes we separate those two parts out into different things. And one of the hardest things to do is we can often see suffering in others, but being able to feel safe enough and regulated enough to recognize those difficulties in ourselves can be really difficult. It can be really uncomfortable. So I think for me, I didn't realize until my mid to late 30s that I got through a lot of things by being in a discomfort that I was so used to that I kind of took it for granted and didn't notice it, didn't recognize the suffering that could come along with it. So it's quite a vulnerable act to go, oh, hang on a moment, let's notice this, because then once you notice it, you can take an action to address it and start addressing some of those patterns that might show up for us. So, and particularly, anyone who's in the profession that we're in, we're generally in it because we're interested in people. We recognize that people are struggling or suffering in some way. We can sometimes go into the mode of wanting to fix, which isn't always helpful. The action sometimes might be about validation. It might be about compensating. It might be about just making space for it, so that we don't become overcome by how overwhelming it might feel, because we sometimes think, oh, if I open up this box and see what's in this, it'll be so big it'll overwhelm me, I won't be able to function. So that making space can be an action. And I think the things that it's one thing, as a professional, we give our clients homework all the time. We have to then reflect on ourselves and think about what works for us and how we can do things in ways that allow us to go, actually, that's really hard. I can give myself permission for that to be hard.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. I don't think that anybody can support someone else without supporting themselves, and asking those hard questions and allowing ourselves to feel in a way that we have never allowed ourselves to feel. We always had to be strong, or we have meltdowns. We have, we put such difficult labels, such hard labels to our emotions very often. But without actually being able to feel that, as Sarah just said, feeling those hard feelings, feeling those very uncomfortable feelings, you also don't really get an understanding and awareness of yourself as a person. And we all have the right to feel ourselves as our own person. And I think that is where the support comes in, because that's so difficult. You very often need somebody else, I find, or a group of people who can share that experience, who can hold that experience. Or therapist, somebody who can offer it, but it can come in many different ways, but it's very, very hard on your own.
And one of the things I will say is shame can keep us going on our own, because shame is designed to make us hide away. We don't want to be rejected. We already feel weird enough or odd enough, or, so shame goes, don't share that. I think, I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but quite a few of my clients go, oh, Sarah, you've made me feel very normal today. And I think it's because I will model being imperfect, model going, actually, we don't always have it together. We don't always get it right. And I'm not a therapist sitting up here with my status. I'm going to be with you on this journey, but also I'll get it wrong, and that's okay. We'll make errors, we'll make mistakes. We have to just kind of work through it.
Do you think it's kind of, I suspect, I don't think there's a study being done. I think it'd be wonderful, but I suspect that healthcare is very attractive for many neurodivergent individuals, because there is a certain altruism, or this, I know a lot of people criticize this idea of super strengths, and a lot of people go, I haven't got any super strengths. Life's a nightmare for me. Stop saying I've got super strengths. But there's an affinity towards looking after others and noticing others' emotions and being able, which is such an important part of healthcare. But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you've got that ability to notice and do and listen maybe more naturally. But then you've also got this other side, which is you're less likely to look after yourself, and you're going to give everything to that person in front of you and take all that energy away and not care for your own mental health. And is that fair to say? Do you think probably that is a situation in healthcare and people who are looking after others?
Yeah, I think there are studies done on that. And I recognized when I was at the university, because we looked after all kinds of different courses, the healthcare courses had a very, very high percentage of neurodivergent students. And exactly what you're saying, came across. They wanted so badly to look after everybody else, but found it very, very hard to look after themselves. I think you are drawn to what you're missing yourself, so plus we tend to be very good in observing. We tend to be very good at listening. We want to know, a lot of us really want to know. So yes, we are drawn to, or I have observed that a lot of therapists and a lot of healthcare professionals are neurodivergent. I don't know, Sarah, you are one of them. So what is your what is your observation?
I would say there's probably same as I always say to comedians. I was like, you're not comparing yourself to the average bell curve here because of what you're doing. I think there definitely is. I think, as well as it being some of the natural strengths, I think it also comes from finding things hard. If you don't understand where people are coming from, you can get really curious about that and go, oh, I want to understand people. I'm going to do it the way I know how, which is academically or theoretically or through a structure. It can come from a sense of like over responsibility, that by making missteps when you're younger, you suddenly kind of go into this pattern of going, well, to manage those missteps, that's down to me. Therefore, I'm also responsible for this person's well-being. So I think regardless of neurodivergence or not, I think the attachment styles of health professionals are probably that sort of way we keep ourselves safe with other people, with relationships, will mean that we're more likely to kind of gravitate towards these positions. And I think it doesn't happen often enough, but I feel like when we have clinical supervision, when we've got mentoring, to try and foster a relationship with our mentor or a supervisor where we can talk about that human relating part, and when we do feel responsible, when we do feel guilty, that can be really important for making sure that we can stay well. Because if you're kind of running on feeling responsible, feeling guilty, that leads to burnout, because we will have clients who we're not necessarily going to be able to alleviate all their suffering in the way the client wants us to or asks us to. And if we're in tune with that person's emotions and we've built our identity on being able to help people, that's so stressful and so difficult.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's particularly, I think, a lot of the listeners are soft tissue therapists, massage therapists, and they've been trained. A lot of healthcare is trains you to be a fixer, where you're doing things to people. And that double burnout, because you feel that you're only, helping them when you're doing things to them. So you're taking, when they don't do it, when you give them advice and they don't do it, then that's going to cause turmoil in your mind as well. And yeah, in healthcare, we're just not taught the coaching style enough, are we? Where you sit back and just be there and walk with them, as opposed, it's all very directive approach. So yeah, oh geez, I'm feeling negative now. Okay, right, the next half hour. It's just disaster. Right, half hour. It's Imi break time. So Imi, thanks for joining us, Imi. Imi says, finally, I'm so proud of me. I told you it would happen. Imi Tester, lovely Imi Tester says, sorry I'm late, still at work. So glad you have an OT on. Wow. Imi's been asking for about 2.5 years. Get an OT on. So Imi, there you go. And not just an OT, we've got the OT. There we go. There you go. Also is coming through the door, Deb Bertholo-Rowley. So nice to see you, Debs. Hope you're well. Thank you much for joining us. So yes, in the next half hour, we talked a lot about the difficulties and the need for support and self-compassion. I thought maybe now, because we could talk about that for ages and it deserves it, but maybe we'll look now at some specific suggestions. Again, there's not going to be one-size-fits-all solutions for everybody, which I think is worth mentioning, but maybe just some tips through your own experience or people you've worked with of how to look after your working day, with the idea of a clinician and a therapist of whatever practice, physio, chiro, osteo, whatever. So maybe we could look at them. Some of the things which you've found can help people, if they are neurodivergent therapists, to have less chance of burnout. Who would you like to start?
I can start on it. I've got so much to say on.
You go for it, Sarah.
Again, we need to acknowledge the one size fits all, because I always I did a brilliant piece of work with one of the most neurodivergent inclusive organizations I've ever worked with, but to be really helpful, they sent the interview questions out a week in advance because they knew lots of autistic people were applying. I was like, oh, I've never had to ask for a reasonable adjustment around interview before, because if I get those questions in advance, ADHD brain's going to do one of two things. It's either going to ignore it and stress about it for a week because I can't open it and look at it, or it's going to hyper-focus, create incredibly detailed, over-convoluted answers. But when it comes to the interview, won't go to that information because that's not new or novel. And so we kind of tend to think of adjustments as if you've got this, you need this, and it doesn't work like that. It also heavily depends on the environment that you're in, because what my needs are when I'm working self-employed, delivering one-to-one sessions over video calls is, I'd say, largely in my control, but I'm probably my own worst boss, because I'm sitting here with a bright light on so that my client can clearly see my face. That isn't aligned with my sensory needs at all. But I'm in control of my immediate environment. I can change my lighting. I can think about how I schedule my appointments so that it works with my concentration style. So I need novelty, but I also take a while to transition between different activities. So I like to theme and cluster my days, that I know that on a Tuesday morning, the general feeling is this, and on which will be kind of one-to-one client work. On a Friday morning, I'll do supervision. So I kind of color cluster it into different themes, and that helps me with the transition. I have less control over that when I'm doing work for the NHS or work for other people. And the assumption can sometimes be that I will know what my own needs are and articulate it. And I don't know if you find this, Kassandra, but how often do we kind of assume we know what we want, or people feel like I can't ask for adjustments, or I don't really know what would help. That's such a common theme. So I think the recognizing what your concentration style is like and how easy you switch between tasks can give you information. Working hours that reflect your energy can be useful as well. That's often possible in both scenarios of being self-employed or being employed. I have a lot of assistive tech that helps me. Conversely, there's a lot of assistive tech that I really don't like, but I've seen work really well for some of my clients. So it's about thinking about what is my challenge. So for me, one of my big challenges, which I'm sure many people share, is organizing and prioritizing that after I've spent half an hour with someone, what bits of that are important to document. How do I select it and make the time and not think it's just going to take me 4 minutes, because a note never takes me 4 minutes. So either recognizing that time and accounting for it, or I now use some lovely AI GDPR compliant health software that records my sessions and makes a smart note that I'm not working from an empty page. I can tweak it. It's also, I think, really important to recognize if your workplace is right for you. I spent a lot of time thinking I should work in hospitals, and then wondering why I was crying in the toilets in my lunch break. And I was like, actually, it's really unpredictable environment. It's really overstimulating. I'm not having processing time. I'll go work in the community. And then working in the community, I was like, oh, I've got the thinking time, but I'm really overstimulated. I'm dyspraxic. The amount of mental effort for me to plan journeys and work out where I'm going was then the next layer of challenge that came up for me. And then I've worked out a really nice, happy balance of it works well for me to have some in-person clinics, and it works really well for me to be online doing video calls. And that way I can control my environment and have that predictability. So sometimes we've got to think about, is the environment that we're in really ever going to suit us? Because I can tolerate being in a ward environment, but in terms of me thriving, that's not going to work. I've talked for a long time on lots of random different bits, so I will give you guys a chance to chip in, because otherwise you'll be there till 10 o'clock.
No, that was great. There was so much in there, and don't worry, I've stored it And now we're going to, because I'm actually in tune. I'm telepathetic with our listeners, and I know what they're thinking. So first of all, is what's the name of the software she uses? So what's the name of the software you
I
use?
use 𝐤𝐴𝐳𝐷𝐸. There's about 3 or 4 of them
Fantastic.
out there. Some
Yeah.
are geared towards certain professions. 𝐤𝐴𝐳𝐷𝐸 is I know osteos, I know physios that use it, so that one's really nice. I use Dragon speech to text software so that I can talk quite quickly, and it's very good at picking up on my accent and translating what I'm thinking into writing. They're the 2 main ones.
That's really cool. And you mentioned it's all GDPR, and it's all kind of, you're happy with it, and obviously you're going to be very big on that. So that's good, because people have concerns about that. That was excellent. That was the first thing which got ticked in my mind. The other thing was just, I really like the way you answered this question, because even when I was trying to phrase, what question shall I ask? I didn't like the idea, what tips? That's horrible. What tips? It's like, what advice? Well, no, you can't advise until you've listened to somebody and what they need. So it's like, what word do I use? But I think you've really explained it nicely, because it's the most important thing is to look at your own needs. And that might take, in my experience, that might take a conversation like we started off talking to someone else, because you only know what you know, don't you? And you might not know that there's an alternative. You know, somebody might be working in a hospital and not realize that this isn't the only thing they could do, that they could get support and over this. So again, it brings us back to having a mentor or talking with other people, having a good network of people who could give you ideas of what else you could do, I guess.
I've just also realised that I'm just creating, and it's not quite finished. There's quite a few documents out there that have suggestions for adjustments you can make. There's a US website called Ask.Jan. There's a great dyspraxia document. There's a few different autism ones I've seen, a couple of different ADHD ones. What I'm currently trying to create, because a lot of those make assumptions, is something that's kind of easier to get people to think about the different aspects of what helps. And it came about from a conversation with a colleague where we'd both shared our communication styles, and I'd put a lot of detail about what does or doesn't work for me in email communication and video call communication. And they were like, oh, I've never thought about that. And from that, they started thinking about, well, what do I need before I meet someone? What do I need during that? What do I need in the communication? And there's so many things we do in our day-to-day life that we don't break down, and we don't think about where those challenges might lie. And something as simple as, I still forget to do it, but I try and remember that if I'm saying to someone, if you're going to email me, if you want me to do something, put in bold action. And then I might skim read and miss a lot of information, but if I see bold action, I know. Also, don't put things in highlight, because my eyes skim over that and it somehow makes it invisible, whilst you're thinking highlighting it makes it stand out. So we can think about what helps us, like, translate what that person needs, and just normalize sharing our different communication styles and needs. Anyway, that was a side tangent you just reminded me of.
That's great. No, I could tell by your face you were still thinking of something you've ended before, so that's fine. But it's, communication. I think that's something which is interesting to pick up on, maybe, because we're going to have listeners out there who work by themselves. So we've kind of said, get a support system definitely in place if you're a solo clinician. But if you are working in a clinic, maybe with other therapists and with managers, maybe, then I guess some guidance on that, of how to communicate with colleagues, how to communicate with a manager when you are trying to kind of look for reasonable adjustments and things like that. So maybe, Kassandra, you work a lot with kind of late diagnosed or not diagnosed neurodivergent professionals. Have you found that there's some ideas which individuals can consider on how to improve the way they relate with other people in their work environment to make their lives easier, but without the fear of kind of rustling feathers or that dreadful fear of that eye rolling? I think that's another thing which I think scares a lot of people, and it's big now at the moment. And unfortunately, I understand why it's big. Social media's got its claws into neurodivergence, and it's all over the place, and there's this and that, and it's people are eye rolling the same way as we eye roll at anything which is just thrown down our throats all the time. But yeah, what would you say, Kassandra, with that, and ways to communicate with people around you to try and help yourself?
One thing that I have found most useful when I was working still with students, because officially they could have those adjustments, but they were very, very often not what they needed, like Sarah was saying, so they were boxed in, you can have this, you can have that. Nevertheless, they would have helped, but there was not much of an understanding. So the eye rolling and the like, oh yeah, okay, and also sometimes other students thinking, oh, they've got a privilege over me. I've heard that actually also being said. I always suggested give the person you're talking to a carrot. Why is that helpful to them to do that? So rather than coming in and saying that's what I need, which closes people's minds to some extent, it's like, okay, what I really would love to do is improve with that, or support you with this, or do something that I know that is needed on the ward, that is needed in the group. And in order to do that, it would be really, really helpful to have. And usually these kind of conversations have gone an awful lot better for everybody, because you are not feeling so ashamed. Other people don't feel like you're treading on their toes, or you're asking things that nobody else has to ask for, But also, I think very often you're talking to people who themselves have a lot of needs, and they are shutting down because they haven't yet come to that awareness that they have those needs. So you need to break through that somehow. And I have also privately always, for myself personally, always found that helps best to do it that way around, So because, masking as such is just a tool. It's something that burns us out if we don't know that we are doing it, or that we don't know anything about what our needs. But you also mask very often for very good reasons. People don't need to know certain things about you. In certain environments, you have to adapt. If you are conscious about that, that's working well. I always find that the discussion about what people need is a little bit ambiguous. It's a little difficult for everybody concerned, because as Sarah said, how do we know what we need? It might be different in different environments. Everybody needs different software or different learning assistance. For example, I never got on with Dragon at all. I know that many of my students, one of the things that we found at the university, and I was there for 15, 17 years, people got all of this software, and we know from all the research that it's hardly used, because people get overwhelmed. I mean, you get all these different things, but nobody's training you really properly over time on it. That's one thing. And then it just doesn't fit with people, But what fits, if you can find out what fits, it can change your whole life, doesn't it, Sarah? It just changes everything you do, how you see yourself, how you see the world. You can contribute in a totally different way. You don't burn yourself out in the same way. So helping people, helping the other person to understand themselves and have the patience to try things out over time. And that's not happening very much, but that's what we need. I feel. I'm one of those people who very often says, no, that's not for me. I don't want that. That's too much. But if I can persist without being pushed, sometimes it turns out that it works very well for me in the end. But if I feel that I'm pushed and I'm boxed in, that is very difficult for me then to get over those hurdles. It's just a new thing. It's a different thing. It's something more that I have to deal with. So yeah, listening and actually talking about it. What might actually be good for me? What are you using? How does that work for you? And how are you using it as well? That's a big question. Because sometimes people think, oh, if I get that, I have to use it for everything. But no, maybe you're just using it for those 10 minutes of your day, or even in a week, that really matters. Yeah. So
Very cool.
yeah,
Offer them a carrot.
Behind Sarah there. Yeah.
I really like that idea of offer them the carrot. I think it's a lovely idea. There's definitely a slide there somewhere for a presentation that's going to be used. You haven't patented it or anything, have you?
The carrot.
It's a really nice idea, and I think it does, because you've got to talk the talk, haven't you? If a manager is there and they're being measured on productivity and hitting margins and that sort of stuff, and they're living that, and like you say, they've got their own fears and expectations and pressure. But if you can say, I can, I've just been thinking how I can really help meet my targets more and even go over them if you could do this, and that's a lovely way, isn't it, of starting a conversation, and getting on their page. Sarah, ever offered anyone a carrot?
I have kind of done every approach under the sun, and I'm thinking that the decision to disclose is a really personal one. It's really hard to do. Often we end up in this hyper independent state of thinking, I've just got to do it alone, and there isn't a right or wrong to that, but it gets to that point for so many people where they go, do you know what, I'm going to burn out, or I'm burnt out, I'm rock bottom because I've done it that way. I need to do things differently. What I would say is ask in a way that feels right for you. But what I experience so many of my clients coming to me with is they feel that they can only go to the manager when they've got all the answers. When actually, given that we're working in kind of that service industry where we're looking at people's health, quite often our managers are problem solvers. So let's go to them with a problem. Let's go to them with, I'm really struggling with X, or if struggling feels too vulnerable and you're worried about the perception of that, because I do like to come from a strengths-based focus, actually going in with, I've been doing a lot of work on my self-awareness and how my neurodivergent interplays, and I've worked out these extra levels of effort I'm going to in this, and it's having this impact on me. Can we sit down together and work out a way of managing it? So there's that approach. Or sometimes, as well as the carrot, you got to go for the stick of, there's an Equality Act out there. By being neurodivergent, it might be hard to say I am disabled, but the legal definition of disability is something that lasts more than 12 months, that significantly impacts on our performance. Given you're neurodivergent, you're not operating in the way the majority of people will do. There are going to be significant barriers to doing certain things because they're not built for the way you think. That comes under that definition of disability. So sometimes it has to be as straightforward as saying, I have a disability here and you've got a legal obligation to meet it. And that isn't always my preferred approach. There's often other approaches, but sometimes we're in services where that's the approach that needs to be taken. It can also just be matter of fact of saying, I've realised that I am, insert whatever flavour of neurodivergence you're identifying with. I'd like access to work can fund support, equipment, assessment. Disabled students allowance can fund I need to fill in the form. Can I put down the work details so that, and that's the start of the conversation. But it's so, I think there are not just barriers in terms of stigma and attitude, there can be barriers in terms of the systems we work in, that we work in rigid systems, which is ironic given, often neurodivergent people are pathologized as thinking in black and white, being rigid. And actually, if we look at the systems we're in, they go, oh no, we're not flexible. We can only do this process in this one way. Sometimes it's more about kind of thinking about, well, why do we have to do that process in that particular way? What about the way we work can actually make this more accessible for us, make it more accessible for our clients? So yeah, there's so many different ways of tackling it. I like the carrot option, but I think there's also the collaboration, the stick. There's so many different ways of doing it.
Of course, really that is very important, and it's also different for everybody. I think the carrot works well if you already have run across difficulties with whatever else you have tried. But you have to be very clever and careful. And of course, many of us are not clever and careful at that point because we are burned out and everything. So, and again, it's really helpful to have other people who have gone through it or who know about it, who can support us one way or another. We just shouldn't go it alone if we can help it, and it has nothing to do with people liking to be by themselves, people being used to be by themselves. You still can have a couple of friends or just one friend who is helping you forward, or somebody you can trust, and sometimes you have to go through very uncomfortable feelings to find that person. Maybe the first people we are trying are not necessarily the right people, so again, it helps so much to put ourselves in an environment where we can just listen to what other people are doing if we can't bring ourselves yet to do something ourselves, if that makes sense. So we always say in our events, if you just want to sit there, even with the camera off, you just want to listen and just find your feet within that situation, that can be so important. How should we know what the right thing is for us until we create that awareness? Sarah has said it so well, how we are ourselves going through all these processes. And we are now more aware because we've done it for a certain amount of times. But when I was first diagnosed in my 40s, it was with dyslexia, and so I'm dyslexic. That was probably the least important thing, But it didn't tell me anything. I didn't know what was going on. The only thing that I knew and could say was that I had a lot of coping mechanisms, and the coping mechanisms were starting to strangle me. That was my awareness as far as it went. And then about 10 years later, I realized I was so, attention different, what we call ADHD, and I had both of them. No wonder that I thought I was bipolar many years of my life. And then 10 years later, I realized that I had a lot of autistic traits. I mean, that I was dyspraxic, I knew for quite a while, but had a lot of autistic traits, and that totally floored me. I went through such a huge grief process. I could not have talked to anybody about my needs at that point. It took me about 2 years before I felt comfortable with it and realized that awareness now took so much trauma, so much drama, so much anxiety out of my life, because now I felt I could look after myself, and I never had that feeling that I could do that before. I didn't need to tell anybody anything, but I would just not do certain things anymore, or would do it differently, and I would see people around me differently. But it took me 2 years before I had that awareness. And another 4 years or 5 years before I could talk about it. So if anybody feels like that, you're not alone. Just put yourself into the vibration of people who have perhaps a bit more awareness, who have gone a little longer down the path.
That's great advice. Yeah, wonderful. And again, it seems to come around again to just talking with other people and not being alone. Who would have thought that's the secret to life, is not being alone, which is often, hard to do, but it is out there. And it is a little bit of a snowball effect sometimes. Once you meet someone you can connect with, and it kind of opens up. I think what you said, Sarah, that's really true. And I know that from experiences. It's kind of like, so often it's the case of either doing nothing and just burning out and just collapsing, or jumping in all barrels and opening your mouth and saying things you regret and just looking like the office lunatic or something because you've just gone off on one. And that's not going to achieve it either. And it's trying to find, isn't it, that space between kind of like the two poles, and then making sensible decisions. So it's, doing something. You can't just rely on luck, divine intervention. There might be someone up there, I don't know, I'm not going to get into that now, but you know what, you're going to need some help to live in that space in between, I think, rather than just hoping something magic happens. And there's different definition of insanity, isn't it? I don't think Einstein said it. It's a fallacy, that, but it's doing the same thing again and again and thinking you can get a different outcome is not really a good way of living. But amazing. Well, look, it's 9 o'clock. Fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Sarah and Kassandra. It's so much to think about there and unpin. And we could have talked about so much more, but amazing. Thank you. We have just been able to check in the comments there. Says Sarah Clark. Let's just read this out because I know Sarah is going to say something great. Sarah says, yes, I often say about neurodivergent people being the ones who are creative thinkers. It's everyone else who has rigid thinking styles. Yeah, we can finish on that. That's positive because it is us against them. Let's not forget that, people. That's what we've arrived at the hour after the hour. No, we jest, of course. We're being... Yeah, if that was typed, you'd have a /JK after it just to make you realise it's sarcasm or something, a joke. Brilliant. Right, wonderful. Thank you so much, people who stuck with us being live. This is part 4. This is the end of a fantastic month. It's been amazing. So I just want to take the opportunity. Maybe people who listen to the podcast, you haven't heard all 4. Maybe you joined in tonight and you didn't realise. So they are all out there. And I just want to take this opportunity to just once again take you through the other parts we've had just briefly to let you know. Bear in mind, again, because of the audience we've got tonight, there is the Facebook group, Neurodivergent MSK Clinicians, and we'd love to see you there. And that could be a starting place, a stepping stone maybe, to get some support and know where to go next. But I just wanted to thank, briefly, starting at part 1, we had, let me just get this right. I want to do it in order. We started off with communication. That was wonderful. Rosie Sexton, osteopath at Alton Health and Performance, and Kassandra Clemens was there in part 1, founder of Heal Your Confidence, and Benjamin Mace Crosley of Repose Injury Rehab. So that was part 1. In part 2, we talked about hypermobility. And that was with Bonnie Southgate, MSK advisor at 𝐤𝐧𝐞, Jess Yanneman, advanced clinical massage therapist at 𝐸 Therapies, and Rosie Sexton came back for more. I think Sarah will be having words with Rosie after this, just jumping in. Sorry, Rosie. And then in part 3, we had barriers, which was last week. That was with 𝐤𝐴𝐺, founder of Strong Path, neuro-inclusive and mental health-informed sports coaching. And the wonderful Leslie Campbell was with us, a massage therapist and tutor based in Glasgow, Scotland. And then part 4, which obviously was tonight. I've had the pleasure of spending time with Sarah Meharg, occupational therapist and neurodivergent accessibility and inclusion consultant at Moodlifter, and the yesterday launched Neuroflectuk UK, which will be in the show notes. Look out for that. And also Kassandra Clemens, founder of Heal Your Confidence. A great month. Hopefully it'll be something which will help a lot of people, and hopefully it just won't have a shelf life of like, that's it, we'll move on now. Do share this with people if you've come across it, even if it's like 2027 and it's still relevant, then do try and share it. But it will be on YouTube, hopefully, until, I don't know, whatever happens next. But it relies on people who are listening to it and joining us to share it and get this great information out there. So do share it where you think it might be helpful, because that's why we do it. It's all about helping listeners and just sharing the quality information of our guests. So thank you, Sarah Meharg. Thank you, Kassandra Clemens, for the finale. It was fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves and found that it useful for you as well. Any closing thoughts from you two? I do not want to be the last person to talk on this episode. That would be ridiculous. Sarah, what are you thinking?
I feel like Kassandra's probably got some really calm, soothing closing thought, whilst I'm like, it's 9 o'clock chaos away. So I'll hand over to Kassandra.
Okay. I don't have any wise words either. It's too late in the evening for that. Summing up, help yourself. Move forward one way or another, by watching this, by telling other people about it, by going to an event, by talking to anybody else. Just don't sit tight. Move on one way or another, whether you feel uncomfortable about it or not. We all have felt uncomfortable, and we all feel uncomfortable quite often, even now. It's all right.
Sarah was right, wasn't she, Kassandra? Sarah was like totally right what she said. Yeah, wonderful. Closing thoughts. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. If you listen to the podcast, then do please do us the favour of just leaving a rating and a review. It'll take a couple of minutes on your iPhone. If you have sold yourself to the devil, then that's easy for you. Android, you have to do a load of other things, but do please leave a rating and a review because it just helps us appear higher in Google. So thank you if you can do that. We will be back in February. The focus is going to be on pain. I've got some amazing guests lined up for you. Really looking forward to that. There'll be details to be shown on social media. But for now, thank you to everybody who's been part of this focus on neurodivergence in healthcare. Thanks to everyone who's joined us and listened. Thanks to all the speakers. And look after yourselves and look after each other. We'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.